I never imagined the day would come when my own daughter would ask me to sign away my parental rights, only to turn around and ask for money for her wedding. To be completely honest, I'm grateful that Tara has a strong bond with her stepmother, Dany. But to understand how we got here, I need to go back to where it all started. Mark and I were young when we fell in love, swept up in the kind of passion that makes you believe nothing else matters. We married quickly, convinced it was the right thing to do. And then, I got pregnant. I won't lie, Mark tried to be a good father, at least in the way he thought a father should be. But the truth? He was lazy. Utterly, infuriatingly lazy. I was the one who did everything, feeding Tara, changing her diapers, pacing the floor at night when she refused to sleep, giving her baths, taking her for walks. Mark? He was the fun parent. The one who came home, spent an hour with her, if that, and then disappeared into his den for the rest of the night, lost in his video games. And in that 1 hour, I was either cooking his meals or cleaning up the kitchen. Whenever I asked him to help, just a little, just enough so I could catch my breath, he would dismiss me with a wave of his hand. "That's a woman's job," he'd say. "That's how God intended it." Those words still burn in my memory. They sparked countless arguments, me pleading for some relief, him refusing outright. One night, I was so sick I could barely move. Desperate, I asked him to take care of Tara so I could rest, just for a little while. Instead of stepping up, he started another fight, calling me lazy, ranting about how his mother never asked his father for help. That was the moment I snapped. I told him if he didn't help, I would leave. I meant it. And for the first time, something in my voice must have rattled him. He grumbled, sulked, but in the end, he took a leave of absence to watch over Tara while I recovered. But that didn't change things. As my maternity leave neared its end, I reached out to my mother for help with babysitting. She agreed, without hesitation. Mark's mother? She never even offered. Not once. And honestly, that was fine with me. Mark, on the other hand, wasn't fine with anything. He hated the idea of me returning to work. He had been trying to push me into becoming a stay-at-home wife for ages, but I refused every time. Looking back now, I thank God I held my ground. Because then, Mark lost his job. His company downsized, and just like that, he was out of work. The news hit him hard. And me? I wanted to panic too, but I knew if I crumbled, he would crumble even more. So I steadied myself and told him not to worry, I would take care of everything until he got back on his feet. Since he was home all day, I asked him to take over Tara's care to give my mother a break. At first, he resisted, but eventually, he agreed. That's when things went from bad to worse. Every evening, I came home to the same scene, Mark, parked on the couch, controller in hand, locked into his video games. Tara, left to entertain herself on the floor. The house was a mess. Dishes piled in the sink. Tara's clothes were unchanged, her hair unbrushed, her stomach empty. He wasn't taking care of her. He wasn't even trying. I was furious. Here I was, working long hours to support all of us, guilt gnawing at me every second because I wasn't home with my daughter, only to come back and find her neglected. Every time I confronted him, he'd insist he was trying to find a job. But in 6 months, not a single interview. Not a single effort. Then, one day, he hit me with a new plan. He wanted to take a business course. He had always dreamed of starting his own company, and now, he said, was the time. I was stunned. We had bills to pay. Tara to take care of. I begged him to focus on finding stable work first, just until we were on solid ground. But it was already decided. He had talked to his parents, and they were ready to cover his tuition. I was the last to know. Looking back, that should have been my breaking point. The moment I walked away. But like a fool, I stayed. While I worked and cared for our daughter, Mark went back to school. He graduated, launched his business, and soon, things took off. He started hiring employees. And that's when she entered the picture. Dany. She was young, fresh out of college, eager to prove herself. Mark hired her as his personal assistant. They spent long hours together, but I never thought much of it. The idea of him cheating never even crossed my mind. Until he started bringing Tara to the office. Until he insisted that Tara and Dany spend time together. I had a gut feeling. Something wasn't right. I asked him outright, "Is there something going on between you and Dany?" He scoffed, rolled his eyes. "You're overthinking things." I wanted to believe him. I tried to believe him. Until my friend called me one day, her voice hesitant, unsure if she should even be telling me this. She had seen Mark at a cafe, holding hands with another woman. She had no idea who Dany was. But I did. I felt sick, humiliated. That evening, I laid my trap. I told Mark to invite Dany over for dinner. "She works for you. I should get to know her too," I said, keeping my voice even. He had no clue I already knew. The moment she walked in, I didn't hold back. "I know everything," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Mark froze. Dany paled. I didn't care anymore. I didn't care if she had been sleeping with my husband because, at this point, our marriage was beyond saving. But I wanted them to own up to it. To admit what they had done. Dany's lip trembled as she finally whispered, "I love him. I never meant for this to happen. I'm sorry." Mark, on the other hand? He had the audacity to be angry. "Why did you even invite her if you already knew?" he snapped. "You had no right to embarrass us like this." Us. As if he was the victim. As if I was the one who had betrayed him. Then, with all the arrogance in the world, he sneered, "I'm not going to apologize. This marriage failed because of you." And I laughed. A bitter, hollow laugh. Because of me? Oh, he had no idea what was coming next. I had spent years trying to balance it all, love, work, family, but nothing was ever enough for him. Mark always wanted more. More attention. More validation. More of me. But I had my own ambitions, my own independence, and I refused to sacrifice that just to keep him satisfied. When he confronted me, saying I had neglected him, I shook my head, frustration simmering beneath my skin. How could he not see it? I had been the one keeping food on the table while he was jobless, the one holding everything together even when he left to study. He argued that I should have left my job when his business took off. That I should have trusted in his success. But I couldn't take that risk, not when our future depended on dual incomes. I had seen too many people lose everything by putting all their faith in someone else's dream. I wasn't about to do the same. The sheer audacity of him trying to twist things, trying to make me the villain in this, filled me with a fury I could barely contain. So, I laid it all out for him. I reminded him how I had never once neglected him or our daughter, Tara. How, despite my job, I had handled all the house chores, ensuring our home was never lacking. He had no right to pin this disaster on me. But he kept pushing, kept trying to make me the scapegoat for his own failings. I refused to entertain it any longer. Instead, I turned to Dany and mouthed a silent good luck before excusing myself from the table. Because now, I knew exactly what needed to be done. Mark had given me an escape. An excuse. He had freed me from the burden of justifying why I needed to leave. At one time, I had loved him, truly. But since Tara's birth, we had become nothing more than strangers occupying the same house. I had carried the weight of our home, our lives, while he drifted along. And now, it was time for me to let go. I packed my bags, Tara's too. Mark stood there, dumbfounded, his voice rising in protest as he demanded to know what I was doing. I met his gaze, unwavering. "I'm leaving," I said. "And I'll be sending you the divorce papers soon." His expression twisted with disbelief. He scrambled for words, pleading that I was acting too rashly, that we should take a moment to breathe, to think it through. But there was nothing left to consider. I had already given this marriage more than enough chances. So, I left. I took Tara and moved back in with my parents, the weight of years of exhaustion slowly peeling off my shoulders. If you think Mark's family reached out, offered me some kind of comfort, you'd be mistaken. They never said a word to him about breaking up our family. It wasn't until later that I finally understood why. Dany wasn't just young, she was wealthy. Marrying her meant Mark was securing a future draped in financial security. Honestly, I couldn't have cared less. My only concern was ensuring that Mark and I remained good co-parents for Tara's sake. My first impression of Dany wasn't terrible, she didn't seem like a bad person. If anything, I could only hope she'd be a good stepmother to my daughter. The divorce proceedings were swift. I took half of Mark's assets, more than enough, considering his business had soared into six-figure earnings. With that, I bought a home for Tara and me. We settled into our new life with a co-parenting agreement. I had Tara from Monday to Friday, and Mark took her from Friday evening to Monday morning, dropping her off at school to start her week. It didn't take long for him to move Dany into the house we had once shared. Tara would come home with excited stories of expensive dinners at high-end restaurants, weekend trips to amusement parks, and lazy Sundays filled with nothing but movies and treats. At first, I didn't think much of it. But slowly, something began to shift. She started pulling away from me. I became the boring parent. The one who enforced rules, made sure she did her homework, taught her how to do simple chores, washing dishes, folding laundry, things that would help her grow. She hated it. I was the one who insisted on healthy meals, refusing to indulge her daily cravings for McDonald's. Meanwhile, Mark and Dany were the fun parents. They spoiled her, let her do whatever she wanted. She started insisting on extravagant gifts, things that weren't reasonable for a child. When I refused, she would sulk. When I stood firm, she would lash out with sharp words that cut deeper than she realized. "I wish I lived with them all the time," she once said. It shattered me. But she was just a kid. I had to remind myself of that. Things only got more complicated when Dany became pregnant with twins. Tara was 12 at the time, and the news sent her into a spiral of anxiety. She constantly sought reassurance, asking me if her father would still love her once the babies arrived. I did my best to comfort her, but I knew my words could only do so much. I reached out to Mark, urging him to talk to her, to make sure she knew she wasn't being replaced. To my relief, he did. He promised her that nothing would change. But something did. Tara wanted to spend more time with him, and he welcomed it. Her visits shifted from weekends only to include Wednesday evenings. She was so eager to be part of their new family dynamic that she barely spoke to me anymore. And then, without my knowledge, Mark made a decision that left me breathless. He told Tara that her bedroom, her safe space, would be turned into a nursery for the twins. Her new room? The basement. She agreed without hesitation. She was desperate to belong, willing to do anything to stay close to him. And then, after the twins were born, the real heartbreak began. Mark called me one day, his tone clipped. "For the next 2 months, Dany doesn't want Tara coming over," he said. "She needs time to focus on the babies." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You do realize this will destroy your daughter?" I shot back. "She'll think you don't love her anymore." "She'll understand," he countered. "The twins need Dany right now. They're our priority." I broke the news to Tara as gently as I could. But nothing could soften that kind of pain. She sobbed, her voice shaking. "Why doesn't Dany want me anymore?" I held her as she cried, whispering reassurances I wasn't sure I believed myself. A month passed before Mark finally came to pick her up. She ran into his arms, overjoyed. When she returned, she was full of excitement, gushing about how adorable the twins were, how beautiful her basement room looked. I swallowed my frustration. If she was happy, I had to be happy for her. But soon, her visits stretched longer. She found excuses to stay. And then, something else started happening. She became their babysitter. At first, I thought it was innocent. But as time went on, I realized she was doing more than just playing with the twins. She was feeding them, changing diapers, caring for them as if they were her responsibility. I confronted Mark. "She is not your nanny. She is your daughter. This is how siblings bond," he shrugged. "No," I snapped. "Bonding doesn't mean treating her like a second mother." He relented. But when Tara found out I had intervened, she was furious. "Dany told me you complained," she screamed. "I want to help them. Why are you always ruining everything?" She didn't see it. She didn't see how she was being pulled into a role she never should have had to fill. And just like that, my daughter, the little girl I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for, was slipping away from me. There was a time when my own daughter compared me to her stepmother in every possible way. Teenagers can be brutally honest, sometimes too honest, and Tara was no different. But as the days passed, she wasn't just comparing, she was becoming colder, sharper, crueler. I remember one evening vividly. I had just come home from work, exhausted, and settled onto the couch with a bowl of ice cream. The simple pleasure of unwinding after a long day was interrupted when Tara stepped out of her room, eyes scanning me with a look I couldn't quite place. Then, with a smirk, she scoffed, "Wow, you're turning into a fat cow." The words cut through me like a blade. I wasn't even overweight, not in the slightest, but the sheer bluntness of her insult left me reeling. When I asked her why she would say something so cruel, her response was just as cold. Dany had taught her that gluten made people fat, and at Mark and Dany's house, she wasn't allowed to eat it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Gluten isn't inherently bad," I told her, keeping my voice calm despite the sting of her words. "And you don't have the right to shame people just because you've decided not to eat it." But that moment was only the beginning. With each passing day, I felt like I was losing my daughter to someone else's influence. Every conversation somehow circled back to Dany. It was always, "Dany says this, Dany does that, Dany thinks I should." It was like I was watching my child transform into a miniature version of her stepmother, and I didn't know how to stop it. She started refusing to go outside when the sun was up, claiming she didn't want to tan. She skipped breakfast, obsessing over losing weight to fit into a bikini, one that Dany had bought deliberately too small. She weighed herself every single day, meticulously jotting down numbers in a diary, as if her worth depended on them. And then, the worst revelation of all, she confided in me that Dany had told her she had the potential to compete in beauty pageants if she stayed committed to this strict routine. That was it. I had reached my limit. Up until that point, I had never confronted Dany directly, but I knew I had to put an end to this. When I finally reached out to her, I expected some sort of understanding. But instead, she dismissed my concerns entirely. "I only suggested that Tara consider pageants," she said, her voice laced with faux innocence. I can't help it if she took my words to heart. I felt my anger rise. "She sees you as a second mother. You need to be more responsible with the things you say." But Dany just smiled, unfazed. "You should be encouraging her to be the best version of herself instead of holding her back." I was stunned. Was that what she thought I was doing? Holding my daughter back? Later that day, my phone rang. It was Mark. But he wasn't calling to support me, he was furious. "Don't talk to my wife like that," he snapped, his voice dripping with indignation. I didn't back down. "Open your eyes, Mark. Can't you see what's happening? Tara is being manipulated." But Mark didn't care. He didn't want to hear it. Tara shouldn't be taking things so far, but there's nothing wrong with a little discipline. Discipline? That wasn't discipline. That was obsession. That was control. I tried to talk to Tara, to reason with her. I told her she didn't need to spend her teenage years obsessing over weight and beauty, that she should just enjoy life. But she didn't listen. She shut me out completely. She started making decisions without even consulting me. If there was a school trip, she wouldn't ask me to sign the permission slip, she'd wait until she was at Mark's house. It was like I was invisible. Like I didn't even matter. The more she pushed me away, the deeper I sank into a pit of despair. But then, at my lowest point, I met Henry. He was my light in the darkness, the only person who seemed to understand what I was going through. He held me together when everything was falling apart, reassuring me that teenagers go through rebellious phases. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a phase. Tara and I fought constantly. Her grades were slipping, and she wasn't turning in assignments. When I tried to hold her accountable, she turned on me, blaming me for everything wrong in her life. And then, she began saying the one thing that shattered me every single time. "No wonder Dad left you for Dany." Each time those words left her lips, it felt like another knife to my heart. I hate to admit it, but I started pulling away, little by little. The pain was too much. Then, on her 18th birthday, she and Mark sat me down. I thought they wanted to talk about college tuition. I was prepared to tell them I would cover half of her expenses. But that wasn't why they were there. Mark cleared his throat, glancing at Tara. Then, in a measured tone, he spoke the words that turned my world upside down. "Tara wants you to give up your parental rights." My breath hitched. I stared at them, stunned, waiting for one of them to say it was a joke. But Tara met my gaze, her eyes filled with determination. "I want Dany to adopt me," she said. "I thought about this for a long time. I felt my entire body go numb. This couldn't be real." Tara reached for my hands, pleading with me. I love Dany more than I love you. I want her to be my real mom. I struggled to process the words, my vision blurring. Why? I whispered, my voice barely audible. She spoke with complete sincerity, explaining how she admired Dany, how she felt a stronger bond with her, how she wanted to be legally tied to her. And then, the final blow, Dany's parents had promised her an inheritance if she became their legal granddaughter. I was drowning in emotions, shock, betrayal, devastation. The room around me felt like it was spinning. Mark chimed in, trying to make it sound reasonable. This isn't personal. It's just what Tara wants. You need to respect her decision. For weeks, I wrestled with the unbearable weight of what was happening. My parents tried talking to her, tried making her see sense, but she refused to take their calls. Every day was a battle between heartbreak and acceptance. I grieved for the daughter I had raised, for the little girl who used to run into my arms, for the mother-daughter bond that had been so effortlessly severed. Through it all, Henry was the only one who stayed by my side, watching helplessly as I broke apart. Even he couldn't believe the cruelty of it all. And in the end, with no other choice, I signed the papers. I won't get into the legal details, it took weeks, but eventually, Tara was no longer mine. Dany proceeded with the adoption, and just like that, I became nothing more than a stranger to my own child. After that, Tara completely cut me off. I can't even put into words how much it hurt. Those days were the darkest of my life. And then, up until that moment, my entire existence had revolved around my daughter. Every choice, every sacrifice, everything had been for her. But watching her slip further and further from my life was a pain unlike any other. The heartbreak was unbearable. I won't lie, there were days when I didn't know how to go on. But Henry kept me breathing. He never left my side, not once. When I sank into the darkness, he was my anchor, pulling me back every single time. He urged me to seek therapy, moved in with me just to ensure I was taken care of, and when I left my job, he shouldered everything without complaint. When I was diagnosed with depression, he made sure I took my medication, made sure I ate, made sure I kept going. Slowly, I found my way back to life. I stopped blaming myself for everything that had happened. Henry, ever patient, suggested I help him with his business, just to keep myself busy. I agreed. It turned out to be exactly what I needed. He became the partner I had never had, but always deserved. I poured myself into my work, into this new purpose, and in the process, I rediscovered joy. The simple kind. The kind that comes from watching a sunrise with someone you love or laughing over an inside joke at the end of a long day. 6 years. That's how long we've spent building a life together. Henry made me his equal partner in every sense, both in business and in love. We got married, created a stable, fulfilling life, one built on mutual respect and unwavering support. I had finally found peace. And then, out of nowhere, yesterday happened. Tara! My daughter! The one who had not so much as called me in years. Her name flashed on my phone screen, and for a moment, my heart stopped. I answered, my mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. Was she in trouble? Did she finally want to reconnect? Her voice, familiar yet distant, brought a flood of emotions I thought I had buried. She asked about my life, shared a few details about hers, and for a fleeting moment, I let myself hope. Maybe, just maybe, she wanted to mend things. Maybe she had matured. Maybe she missed me, even just a little. And then, she got to the real reason for her call. She was getting married. My little girl, married. My emotions spiraled, pride, nostalgia, longing, but before I could fully process it, she hit me with her request. She wanted money. Not just a little, she wanted me to help fund her wedding. I was speechless. She explained how Mark, her fiancé, had struggled financially ever since his business took a hit during COVID. How Dany, the woman she had once chosen over me, had refused to contribute much since she was saving for her twins. And so, she had decided that I, her biological mother, the one she had discarded without hesitation, should step up and foot the bill. She admitted to stalking me on social media, watching from afar as I built a new life, and now that she saw I was doing well, she believed I owed her joy, excitement. Any warmth I had felt at hearing her voice vanished in an instant, replaced by cold, hard disbelief. Was she serious? I took a deep breath, steadied my voice, and calmly told her that while I was genuinely happy she had reached out, I wasn't about to pretend the past didn't happen. I reminded her she had made her choice. She had insisted I sign away my parental rights so that Dany could adopt her. She had made it clear who she considered her real mother. So why, after all this time, was she turning to me now? Tara's tone shifted. She grew defensive. I was still her biological mother, she argued. I had money now, so what was the big deal? A few $1,000s wouldn't even put a dent in my bank account. I made my stance clear. I wished her nothing but happiness, but I would not be writing her a blank check. And that's when she snapped. She called me names, accused me of abandoning her, claimed I hadn't fought for her enough all those years ago. It was as if she was grasping at anything at all, to justify her entitlement. The conversation spiraled. She became more hostile, more accusatory, until finally, with an angry huff, she hung up on me. And now, here I am, replaying it all in my head, questioning myself. Should I have just given in? Would it have been easier? But deep down, I already know the answer. Update. I never expected my story to gain so much attention. Hundreds of strangers have reached out, telling me not to cave to Tara's demands. When I first shared this, guilt was eating me alive, because no matter what, she is still my daughter. But reading all these comments has forced me to step back and see things for what they truly are. She doesn't want me. She wants my money. It's hard to accept, but it's the truth. A mother's love doesn't just disappear. Even if she rejected me, I never stopped loving her. But she's not a child anymore, she's a grown woman. And she's acting like an entitled one. Interestingly, neither Mark nor Dany has reached out to me. I'm guessing they have no idea she even made this request. I won't be giving her a dime. Henry and I discussed it, and he fully supports my decision. Update 2. After reading some advice, I decided to send Tara a message. It was clear and respectful. Dear Tara, I appreciate you reaching out and sharing your life updates. It meant a lot to hear from you. I truly wish you all the happiness in the world. However, regarding your request for financial help, I need to be honest with you. While I understand your desire for support, I must respectfully decline. Given that you chose to remove me from your life, I believe it's best to maintain our current distance. It's important for me to prioritize my well-being and personal boundaries. That being said, I sincerely hope this new chapter in your life brings you joy and fulfillment. I wish you nothing but happiness. I sent the message this morning. Update 3. She saw my message. But she never replied. Not a word. I suppose the majority of you were right. She never cared. Not really. She just wanted my money. Now that she knows she won't get it, she's done. Henry is furious with how she treated me. He suggested I block her to prevent further manipulative attempts, and after some thought, I've decided I will. For those wondering about our will, don't worry. Henry and I don't have children, but he has nieces and nephews whom we adore. They will inherit everything. I appreciate every bit of support I've received from this community. Moving forward, I will continue focusing on my own happiness, on the life Henry and I have built together. I refuse to let guilt or manipulation dictate my choices anymore.